Aliens encounter humans for the first time, what they saw shocked the galaxy. The observation deck of the Kathari research vessel hummed with quiet anticipation as Commander Vexla adjusted the long-range scanners. Her silver carapace reflected the pale blue light of the console as she studied the readings from the small blue planet below. Earth. The third planet in a seemingly unremarkable star system. Yet the energy signatures coming from its surface told a different story entirely. Commander, the biological readings are inconsistent with our database, said Torath, her science officer. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he processed the data streaming across multiple screens. The dominant species shows extreme physiological limitations. Fragile skeletal structure. Minimal natural defenses. No venom glands, no armor plating, no natural weapons to speak of. Vexla tilted her head, a gesture of confusion among her people. Then how did they reach dominance? What apex predator characteristics do they possess? Torath's mandibles clicked nervously. That's what concerns me, Commander. According to these scans, they shouldn't be apex predators at all. They're pursuit predators, but their speed is laughable compared to most prey species on their own planet. Their strength is barely adequate. Their senses are significantly limited to just 5 basic modes of perception. The commander moved closer to the display showing a human settlement. Towering structures of metal and glass reached toward the sky. Lights blazed even in the darkness. Strange vehicles moved in organized patterns along designated pathways. Yet they've built all of this. They've shaped their entire planet. Commander, there's something else, Torath said, pulling up a new data stream. I've been monitoring their communication networks. They have thousands of languages. Thousands. And they're constantly arguing with each other, fighting, competing for resources even within their own settlements. Vexla felt a chill run through her exoskeleton. In the Kathari Empire, unity was everything. One language. One purpose. One mind distributed across billions. The thought of a species perpetually in conflict with itself yet still achieving technological advancement seemed impossible. Show me their history, she commanded. The holographic display flickered to life, showing images pulled from Earth's digital archives. Torath narrated as the scenes unfolded. They've been at war with each other almost continuously for their entire recorded history. Major conflicts every few decades. Weapons that could devastate their own planet multiple times over. Yet they continue to rebuild. They continue to advance. Vexla watched as cities rose and fell. Empires expanded and collapsed. Technologies evolved at a pace that made her mind reel. How long have they had spaceflight capability? Less than a century for significant orbital presence. Just over 60 years since they first left their planet's surface. Torath paused, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. Commander, it took my people 4,000 years to achieve what they've done in 60. The commander said nothing for a long moment. She watched a human astronaut float in the void of space, separated from certain death by only a thin layer of fabric and metal. The human appeared to be smiling. Pull up their entertainment media, Vexla said suddenly. Torath's confusion was evident, but he complied. The screens filled with images from human movies, books, and games. Stories of exploration. Tales of survival against impossible odds. Narratives of individuals standing against overwhelming darkness and refusing to yield. They celebrate struggle, Vexla murmured. They create fiction about their own destruction and survival. They imagine threats that don't exist and then imagine overcoming them. Why would any species do that? Torath asked. Vexla studied an image of a human climbing a mountain, struggling against wind and ice for no apparent practical reason except the challenge itself. Because they don't just survive, Torath. They refuse to accept limitations. Look at this. They deliberately put themselves in danger for something they call sport or achievement. The science officer pulled up medical data. Commander, their bodies are even more fragile than we initially thought. They require constant maintenance. Sleep for a third of their lives. Need to consume resources multiple times per day. Their homeworld is actively hostile to them in many regions, yet they inhabit nearly every environment on the planet. Show me their space programs. The display shifted to show rockets launching from Earth's surface. They strap themselves to controlled explosions, Torath said, his voice filled with disbelief. They ride columns of fire into the void. Their early space program had a significant mortality rate, yet volunteers lined up by the thousands. Vexla watched a grainy video of the first human moon landing. She saw the primitive spacecraft, held together with rivets and hope. She saw the human take that first step onto an alien world and speak words about giant leaps for their species. They sent that mission knowing they might not be able to bring those humans home, Torath added quietly. The probability of success was barely favorable. They went anyway. Commander Vexla turned away from the screens, her mind racing with implications that terrified her. The Kathari Empire had spread across 40 star systems through careful planning, overwhelming force, and absolute unity. They never took unnecessary risks. They never celebrated individual achievement over collective success. They never deliberately sought out danger. Torath, how many nuclear weapons do they currently have aimed at each other? The science officer checked his data. Approximately 13,000. And they haven't destroyed themselves. No, Commander. They call it deterrence. They hold the power of mutual destruction and choose not to use it. Every single day. Vexla felt something she had never experienced before when studying a new species. Not contempt. Not pity. But genuine fear. These humans were individually weak, collectively fractured, and seemingly self-destructive. Yet they possessed something the Kathari had never developed. Something perhaps more dangerous than any weapon. They possessed the absolute refusal to accept the word impossible. Torath, Vexla said slowly, increase our orbital distance. And under no circumstances are we to make contact. Commander. Because, Vexla said, watching another rocket streak into space from the blue planet below, if they can achieve all of this while fighting themselves, I don't want to discover what they're capable of if they ever decide to unite against an external threat. The observation deck fell silent as both officers stared at Earth spinning peacefully below them, suddenly aware that they might be observing the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The impossible species. Commander Vexla's orders to maintain distance lasted exactly 47 hours before curiosity overrode caution. She found herself back on the observation deck, unable to tear her attention away from the planet below. The humans had launched 3 more rockets in that time. 3. The Kathari Empire might launch 1 vessel every lunar cycle, and that was considered aggressive expansion. Commander, you asked to be notified of any unusual activity, Torath said, his voice tense. I found something in their historical records. Something that explains a great deal. Vexla moved to his station. Show me. The holographic display shifted to show medical scans and biological data. I've been analyzing their evolutionary history. Commander, humans nearly went extinct. Multiple times. Ice ages. Volcanic eruptions. Disease. Their population once dropped to barely 10,000 individuals. 10,000. Vexla's mandibles clicked in shock. The Kathari seeded new colonies with more genetic diversity than that. How did they survive? That's what terrifies me, Commander. They didn't just survive. They thrived. Every catastrophe made them stronger. They developed something their scientists call adaptability. When their environment tried to kill them, they changed their behavior. When predators hunted them, they created weapons. When disease struck, they developed medicine. They don't evolve to fit their environment. They force their environment to fit them. Vexla studied the data flowing across the screens. Human history was a timeline of disasters survived and obstacles overcome. What about their social structure? Surely they have some hierarchy that maintains order. Torath pulled up new information, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly in what Vexla recognized as distress. That's another impossibility, Commander. They have hundreds of different governance systems, often contradicting each other. Some humans live under strict authoritarian control. Others live in something they call democracy, where individuals vote on decisions. Some organize by religion. Others by economic systems. And somehow, they coexist on the same planet. That should lead to constant warfare. It does, Commander. Or it did. But look at this. Torath displayed a timeline of human conflicts. The frequency is decreasing. The scale is becoming more controlled. They're learning to manage their differences without destroying themselves. Slowly, yes, but the trend is unmistakable. Vexla felt that chill again. A species that could learn to overcome its own violent nature while maintaining individual thought and freedom. The Kathari had achieved peace through conformity. These humans were achieving it through choice. Show me their technology, she commanded. The display shifted to show human innovations. Medicine that could cure diseases that would devastate other species. Computing systems that processed information at speeds approaching Kathari technology, despite humans having only invented them decades ago. Energy systems that harnessed everything from splitting atoms to capturing starlight. They're incredibly inefficient, Torath noted. They waste enormous amounts of energy and resources. But they compensate through sheer determination and creativity. When one approach fails, they try another. And another. They never stop trying. Vexla watched a video of human engineers working on a problem. They argued, debated, sometimes even shouted at each other. But then they tested their ideas, failed, learned, and tried again. The Kathari method was to calculate the perfect solution before beginning. Humans just started building and improved as they went. Pull up their space exploration plans, she said. Torath hesitated. Commander, you're not going to believe this. The screen filled with human proposals for the future. Colonies on their moon. Settlements on Mars, their neighboring planet. Mining operations on asteroids. Massive structures they called space elevators. Generation ships designed to travel between stars over centuries. They're planning to leave their homeworld, Vexla whispered. Not just exploration. Permanent expansion. Yes, Commander. And look at this. Torath highlighted several projects. These proposals include plans to terraform entire planets. To change the atmosphere and climate of worlds to suit their needs. They've already identified dozens of potentially habitable systems within 50 light-years. Vexla's mind reeled. The Kathari Empire had never considered altering entire planets. They found worlds that suited them and colonized those. The resource expenditure to reshape a world would take centuries. They can't possibly have the technology for that. They don't, Commander. Not yet. But they're developing it anyway. They make plans spanning hundreds of years, knowing they personally will never see the results. They build for future generations. The commander watched as more data streamed across the displays. Human art. Music. Literature. Philosophy. They didn't just survive and reproduce. They created meaning. They asked questions about existence itself. They wondered about their place in the cosmos. Torath accessed their scientific databases. I want to know what they understand about the universe. The science officer worked quickly, pulling information from Earth's networks. His mandibles dropped open in shock. Commander, they've theorized about quantum mechanics. Relativity. The fundamental forces of the universe. Some of their theories align with our own understanding, and they developed them independently. Do they know about faster-than-light travel? They suspect it's possible, but haven't achieved it yet. However, their theoretical work is surprisingly sophisticated. Given another century or two of development. Torath trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought. Vexla completed it for him. They'll be traveling between stars. Without our help. Without anyone's permission. They'll spread across the galaxy like a wave. Commander, there's something else. Torath's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I've been monitoring their cultural output. Their stories. They have a concept they call humanity, which is strange because it's also their species' name. But it represents something more. Compassion. Altruism. The willingness to sacrifice personal gain for others, even strangers. Many species have cooperation instincts. Not like this, Commander. Look at these records. Humans who died saving others. Humans who devoted their entire lives to helping those less fortunate. Humans who fought against injustice even when it benefited them personally. They have individuals who dedicate themselves to preserving other species from extinction. Vexla studied the examples flooding the screen. Human firefighters running into burning buildings. Human doctors traveling to dangerous regions to provide medical care. Human activists fighting for the rights of those who couldn't fight for themselves. It was inefficient. Illogical. And strangely moving. Their contradictions, she murmured. Violent yet compassionate. Selfish yet altruistic. Weak yet unstoppable. Commander, recommendation? Torath asked. Vexla stared at Earth for a long moment. The Kathari Empire had standing protocols for first contact situations. Assess the species. Determine threat level. Establish diplomatic relations or neutralization protocols. But humans didn't fit any category. They were pre-faster than light, technically primitive by galactic standards. Yet everything about them suggested they would explode across the stars within a few generations. We need to go deeper, Vexla decided. I want to observe them directly. Send a stealth probe to their surface. I want to see how individual humans actually behave. Commander, that's against protocol. If we're detected. Do it, Torath. Because right now, I don't know if we're observing a future ally or a future threat. And I need to know which before we report back to the Empire. The science officer hesitated, then nodded. His fingers moved across the controls, launching a probe so small and sophisticated that human sensors would never detect it. Within hours, it would be transmitting close-range observations of human behavior. Vexla watched it streak toward Earth, a tiny silver dart carrying cameras and sensors that would reveal the truth about humanity. She had studied hundreds of species in her career. She had first contact protocols memorized. She had never made a mistake in threat assessment. But as she watched that blue planet spinning peacefully in the void, home to billions of impossible humans, she felt something she had never experienced before in all her years of service. She felt uncertain. And that uncertainty terrified her more than any weapon humanity possessed, the truth about humans. The stealth probe descended through Earth's atmosphere in silence, its advanced cloaking technology rendering it invisible to human detection systems. Commander Vexla watched the live feed with Torath beside her, both officers transfixed by what they were about to witness. The probe had been programmed to observe humans in their natural environment, away from the grand achievements and technological marvels. Vexla needed to see the truth of what humans were at their core. The probe's first stop was a human medical facility. The camera focused on a room where a human female in white clothing tended to an elderly human male. His body was clearly failing, systems shutting down one by one. Yet the female held his hand gently, speaking soft words of comfort. She stayed beyond her required shift hours, simply sitting with him so he wouldn't die alone. She gains nothing from this, Torath observed. He cannot repay her. There's no benefit to her genetic line. Why does she care? Vexla had no answer. The Kathari cared for their elderly because they held knowledge and experience. But this human was beyond contributing anything. Yet the female stayed anyway, offering comfort in the face of inevitable death. The probe moved to a human educational facility where young humans were being taught. A male teacher stood before them, not simply transmitting information, but igniting curiosity. He asked them questions, encouraged them to think, to challenge, to wonder. When a young human struggled with a concept, the teacher stayed after class, patiently explaining until understanding dawned in the child's eyes. The teacher's face showed something Vexla's translators identified as joy. "He's teaching them to question," Vexla murmured. "Not just to obey, but to understand. To think independently." The probe continued its journey, documenting scene after scene that defied Kathari understanding. A human running into traffic to save a small animal. A group of humans organizing to provide food for those who had none. A human scientist working late into the night, driven not by orders but by pure desire to understand the universe. A human artist creating something beautiful simply because beauty mattered. Then the probe found something that made both officers fall silent. A disaster zone where a building had collapsed. Human emergency responders worked frantically in dangerous conditions to reach survivors. But what caught Vexla's attention was a human male who had been trapped in the rubble for days. When rescuers finally reached him, his first words weren't about his own safety. He told them about others still trapped deeper in the debris, insisting they be saved first despite his own injuries. "Torath, analyze that behavior," Vexla commanded, her voice shaking slightly. The science officer worked quickly, running the data through behavioral algorithms. "Commander, that human had a significant probability of death if treatment was delayed. He knew this. He chose to prioritize strangers over his own survival. The Kathari logic matrices cannot explain this decision. It violates every evolutionary principle we understand." But Vexla was beginning to understand something far more profound and terrifying. It's not about evolution anymore. They've transcended pure survival instincts. They've chosen to be more than their biology demands. The probe shifted to a different location, a human dwelling where a family gathered. No crisis. No danger. Just humans sharing a meal together, laughing, telling stories, simply enjoying each other's presence. The youngest human, barely able to walk, stumbled and fell. Immediately, every adult in the room moved to help, their faces showing concern and care. When the small human laughed instead of crying, they all laughed together. "They protect the weak," Torath said softly. "Not just tolerate them. Not just keep them alive for pragmatic reasons. They genuinely cherish them." Vexla watched as the probe documented more scenes. Humans helping neighbors repair homes. Humans adopting young that weren't even their own genetic offspring. Humans creating music and art that served no survival purpose except to add beauty and meaning to existence. Humans gathering in groups simply to share ideas and perspectives, often disagreeing but still respecting each other's right to think differently. Then the probe captured something that made Vexla's blood run cold. A memorial site where humans gathered to remember those who had died in a past conflict. They stood in silence, many crying, mourning losses from decades ago. But carved into the memorial was a phrase in multiple human languages. "Never again." "They remember their mistakes," Vexla whispered. "They carry the weight of their history and vow to do better." Torath pulled up comparative data. "Commander, I've been analyzing Kathari history in parallel. When we encounter obstacles, we calculate solutions. When we face threats, we eliminate them. When we make mistakes, we update our protocols. But we don't feel them. We don't carry them. We don't let them change who we fundamentally are." "Because we can't change who we are," Vexla said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "Our unity is our strength, but it's also our limitation. We're perfect for what we are, but we can never be anything more." The probe continued documenting, and each scene reinforced what Vexla was coming to understand. A human volunteering at an animal shelter, caring for creatures that had no value except that they existed and suffered. A human spending years writing a book that might never be read, simply because the story mattered to them. A human teaching their child to be kind, not because kindness was efficient, but because kindness was right. "Look at this, Commander," Torath said, pulling up communication data. "I've been monitoring their internet, their global communication network. Amidst all the arguments and conflicts, there are millions of humans simply encouraging each other. Celebrating each other's successes. Offering support during failures. Creating communities based on shared interests and mutual respect." Vexla saw forums where humans helped strangers solve problems. Networks where humans shared knowledge freely. Groups where humans organized to make their world better in small, incremental ways. It was chaotic. Inefficient. Beautiful. The probe found a human sitting alone on a hillside at night, staring up at the stars. The human wasn't doing anything, just looking up at the cosmos with an expression the sensors couldn't quite interpret. Wonder, perhaps. Longing. Recognition that they were part of something vast and mysterious. "They know they're small," Vexla said quietly. "They understand their insignificance in the cosmic scale. But instead of accepting it, instead of being crushed by it, they reach for those stars anyway." Torath brought up the final piece of data that sealed their understanding. He displayed humanity's messages to the cosmos. Radio signals sent into space deliberately, announcing their presence to anyone listening. Mathematical proofs. Images of Earth. Music. Greetings in hundreds of languages. Not weapons demonstrations. Not threats. But an introduction. "Hello, we are here, we are human, we want to know you." "They're hoping someone is listening," Torath said, his voice filled with an emotion Kathari rarely experienced. "All. They're hoping they're not alone. Despite all the logical reasons to hide, to stay silent, to protect themselves, they're reaching out with hope." Vexla turned away from the screens, her mind made up. She walked to the communication console and began composing her report to the Kathari Empire. Torath watched nervously as she typed, knowing this report would determine humanity's fate. First contact protocols were clear. Species were classified as targets for integration, subjects for observation, or threats for neutralization. "Commander, what are you recommending?" Vexla paused, her fingers hovering over the controls. She thought about everything they had observed. The contradictions. The impossible achievements. The inexplicable compassion. The relentless hope. Then she thought about what would happen if the Kathari Empire made contact now, while humans were still developing, still vulnerable. She made her decision and completed the report. "I'm recommending immediate quarantine protocols. A exclusion zone around Earth and this entire star system. No contact. No interference. Complete isolation." Torath's eyes widened in shock. "Commander, that protocol is only used for species that represent a fundamental threat to Kathari supremacy," Vexla finished. "Yes. Because that's what humans are, Torath. Not because they'll destroy us with weapons. But because they'll show the galaxy something we've forgotten how to be." She transmitted the report and watched as it uploaded to the Imperial database. Within days, it would reach the High Council. Within weeks, Earth would be designated as forbidden territory. "What did we forget, Commander?" Torath asked quietly. Vexla looked back at the screens showing humans going about their lives. Building. Loving. Dreaming. Failing. Rising. Growing. "We forgot that strength isn't just about survival. It's about choosing who you want to be even when survival is at stake." The Kathari Empire will endure for millennia, spreading across countless stars. We'll be powerful, efficient, unified, and ultimately static. She gestured to Earth below. But they'll be something else entirely. In a few centuries, maybe less, they'll join us among the stars. And when they do, they won't come as conquerors or suppliants. They'll come as themselves. Chaotic. Compassionate. Impossible. Human. And we'll have to face them then, Torath said. Yes, Vexla agreed. But by then, perhaps we'll have learned something from watching them. Perhaps we'll remember that evolution isn't just biological. That the strongest species isn't the one that survives the longest, but the one that chooses to become more than survival demands. She initiated the departure sequence, and their vessel began its slow withdrawal from Earth's orbit. The probe continued transmitting until the last moment, showing humans living their brief, brilliant lives with passion and purpose and hope. As Earth shrank to a blue dot behind them, Vexla made one final log entry. First contact assessment, humanity. Recommendation, isolation and observation. Threat level, absolute. Not because they will harm us, but because they will change us. And change is the one thing the Kathari Empire cannot survive. She paused, then added one final line that would never be included in official reports. Personal note, I envy them. Whatever they become, wherever they go, they will do it as themselves. Flawed. Free. Fully alive. And the galaxy will never be the same. Commander Vexla closed the log and set course for home, carrying with her the knowledge that she had encountered something rarer than any treasure in the cosmos. She had seen a species that refused to accept the limitations of reality. A species that chose hope over despair, compassion over efficiency, and dreams over logic. She had witnessed humanity. And nothing in the galaxy would ever look quite the same again.